Hello, my name is Chrissy Champagne, and you are listening to Residue, a true crime podcast dedicated to keeping you paranoid. While I'm recording this week, it is pouring rain outside, and that is so fitting for what we're talking about today. We are going to be doing something a little different. I thought that since the new remake of The Crow is coming out this week, August 23rd, that we could discuss the curse of the Crow. Was there a curse, or was there just negligence on set? I'll let you decide. And while we're at it, was it really necessary to remake The Crow?
Because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood, an afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it? Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20, and yet it all seems limitless.
That was actor Brandon Lee on the set of The Crow in his very last interview. The Crow is the story of a young musician named Eric Draven who is brutally murdered along with his fiancée Shelley. Eric is brought back to life by a supernatural crow to seek revenge against the villains who destroyed his life. This story explores love, loss, and redemption. The original movie The Crow was made in 1993 and released in 1994. And a new version of The Crow is coming out this week in 2024, 30 years later. Hollywood will continue to remake movies from our childhood, movies that hold a special place in our hearts, and we will continue to be upset at their lack of originality. A movie like The Crow cannot be remade. The Crow was a feeling. It was an aesthetic. It hit at a moment in time that cannot be repeated or replaced for us Gen Xers and millennials, at least. This was the grunge era. And even if you remake the film, I dare you to try to recreate that soundtrack and the feeling it still produces to this day. It was such an iconic soundtrack, and it is stuck in time. You are transported right back to 1994, and you can remember exactly what was going on in your life at that time. Anytime you hear one of those songs from The Crow, or anytime you even just see a photo of Brandon Lee. So it is widely criticized right now that a new version is coming out this week in 2024. I'm okay with it because Bill Skarsgård is starring in it, but I gotta say, I'm not sure I would care if anyone else was. On social media, you can see that some are arguing that it is highly disrespectful to Brandon Lee to recreate this movie, considering everything that happened on the original film set. Not only is it being debated as to whether or not this film should even have been remade, but there's another debate surrounding The Crow, and that is the fact that some people believe the film set was cursed. The theories on the curse of The Crow start all the way back at the very beginning of its creation. The creator of the comic book, The Crow, James O'Barr, grew up as an orphan in Detroit, and he was in and out of foster care homes because it was said that his mother was unable to care for him. As a child, James O'Barr loved to draw, and he was most drawn to and intrigued by monsters. A quote from James O'Barr's biography, and also a quote that I found on a website called sewermutant.com says, James O'Barr's biological mother had been repeatedly in and out of mental institutions, jails, and hospitals all of her adult life. When the social workers came to retrieve the newly born infant James O'Barr, which is not actually his given birth name, and they inquired about his exact age. She could only say that he had been born sometime between Christmas Day and New Year's Eve. His own mother had no idea when his birthday was. Just to put that into perspective for you. He was just assigned a birth date. He was assigned a birth date of January 1st, 1960, and he was taken with his older half-brother to an orphanage in Detroit, Michigan. James said, "I felt like God had his elbow on my neck my whole life." At only 18 years old, James O'Barr is going to suffer a terrible personal tragedy that is going to inspire the comic book The Crow. His fiancée, Beverly, was killed by a drunk driver, and in the aftermath of her death, James is going to have a hard time dealing with this loss, and this is when he will turn towards his art and creation, and this is when he will start writing The Crow. James would say about his fiancée, "She was like an angel to me. She was everything I ever wanted. I thought I did it. I got to the end of the race, and for not giving in, not surrendering through that 16 years of difficulty, I finally got the prize. She was the exact opposite of me. I was dark and brooding and really sarcastic, venomous. She was this bright white light. I never heard her say a word against anyone. If I were to verbally attack anyone, she would point out their good points. So it was like positive and negative. We just fit together perfect." Soon after Beverly's death, James is going to join the Marines, and while stationed in Berlin, the Marines realize that, he's a pretty talented artist, and they ask him to start drawing pictures for their instruction manuals. These manuals would include things like what to do with corpses and hand-to-hand combat. James started working on his comic The Crow while he was in the Marines, and although it was in part inspired by the death of his fiancée, it was also inspired by a news story that he read in 1979 about a couple who was killed over a $20 engagement ring. The Crow was one of the few comics in the 1980s that was shaped by the post-punk and new wave subcultures. James said that he pulled from early Coen Brothers films and also from bands like Iggy Pop and the Stooges and Joy Division. James finished writing The Crow in 1981, but no one would pick it up. He wanted to sell the comic, and in late 1988, Caliber Press did end up picking up the comic. There is also a fun fact that the author John Shirley reached out to James to see if he could possibly turn The Crow into a musical. He wanted it to be a movie musical, and it was going to be called The Crow, the Musical. And you'll never guess who was going to be the main star. Think 80s pop king? Michael Jackson. The Crow, the Musical, starring Michael Jackson. James said no. Paramount Pictures would end up getting the rights to The Crow and would start to create the screenplay for the feature film. They wanted the director Alex Proyas because he was this up-and-coming Australian actor who hadn't yet made his breakthrough film. He was just waiting for the right screenplay, and this was it. And Alex Proyas tried to keep the movie as close to the comic as he could. He says it wasn't a black and white film, but it was filmed in drowned out color, and the colors were desaturated, and he filmed mainly at night. Filming for The Crow was going to take place in early 1993, and they had not cast their lead, Eric Draven. Many very popular actors at this point were being talked about to play the role of Eric Draven. Johnny Depp, River Phoenix, and Christian Slater were all wanted for this role. At this time in the 90s, Brandon Lee was now establishing himself as a rising action star. He landed the breakthrough role of Eric Draven. Brandon Lee was the son of martial artist and iconic film star Bruce Lee, who died when Brandon was only 8 years old. Brandon wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, and he was trained in martial arts. Before being cast in The Crow, Brandon Lee had starred in the movie Showdown in Little Tokyo with Dolph Lundgren. He also starred in a leading role in the movie Rapid Fire. Brandon Lee was born on February 1st, 1965, and Brandon Lee would film the very first scene for The Crow on February 1st, his birthday, 1993. Before we get into why people believe this film is cursed, let's learn a few fun facts. So one fun fact is that Eric Draven's makeup is based on makeup that James O'Barr saw on some creepy marionettes in a London theater. Also, there were actually no crows used on the set of this film. They used ravens, and that's because of a few reasons. One is that ravens look more impressive on film, and they are easier to train. As soon as filming began, things started going wrong on the set, and this created a lot of media frenzy. There was actually an article written for Entertainment Weekly, and in that article, the author wrote, quote, "Things have happened, but it's not like anyone has died." On the very first day of filming, a 27-year-old carpenter would be driving a cherry picker on set, and he would back into a live wire, which had caused him to be electrocuted, and he had second and third degree burns. He would survive, but he would lose his ears, and his wife, who actually was about to give birth right before this happened, she said that it would take her husband about 5 years to recover, and even after that recovery, he was never the same. In another incident, a stunt worker would fall through a rooftop set and break many ribs. A set worker was fired on set and took a truck and drove it straight through the set of The Crow. On top of all of this, the storm of the century has now hit North Carolina, and the cast and crew is just drenched every day. I mean, the sets of The Crow have a lot of rain on them anyway, but they were freezing most of the time that they were trying to film. And not only that, but the storm of the century just destroyed most of the sets and props. It is now March 30th, 1993. It is day 47 of filming, and it is almost the end of production. The scene that we are supposed to be filming this day is a scene in which Eric Draven returns home and the villains are in his home. Now, this scene was changed last minute. In the scene, Eric Draven was supposed to be stabbed, and a knife was going to be thrown at him as he entered the door into his apartment. The special effects artist, Lance Anderson, says that he was actually building a harness that Eric could wear, that Brandon Lee could wear, and that harness would allow the knife to embed into his chest. So he's working on this harness, and he gets a call from the director, and he says, "We've changed the scene. We don't need the harness anymore. When Eric comes through that door, we are now going to shoot him. We're going to use a gun instead of a knife." Special effects makeup artist Lance Anderson speaks extensively about this incident if you watch the docuseries Cursed Films Season 1, Episode 4. That documentary was one of my main sources, and I have the link listed in my show notes. So, very last minute, everything is changed on set, and now Eric Draven is going to be shot, and this is how it will happen. Actor Michael Massey, who played Fun Boy, is going to take the gun and fire at Brandon. Brandon Lee would come through the door with his grocery bag, and Michael Massey would shoot him. He shot him directly in the stomach, and Brandon falls down, drops down, and everyone on set just waits for him to get up because they're not quite sure what's going on. Is he acting? He never moved. And finally, somebody on set yells, "Call a medic." The medic comes and he tells everyone that Brandon has actually been shot. After hours of surgery in the hospital, Brandon Lee would die from that gunshot wound. Before this tragedy even occurred, the media and the public, they were all talking about this curse on The Crow. And now, as you can imagine, everyone's just going crazy, insane with the theories about why this happened. There were two main theories floating around. One was that a group of criminals, a Chinese mafia called the Triads, were upset that Bruce Lee and his family would never star in any of their films. So that is why they took revenge and killed Brandon Lee and also Bruce Lee. There's a theory that the Chinese mafia killed him for betraying the martial arts secrets and displaying them to everyone through his Hollywood films. And then there's the theory that Bruce Lee's family had a curse on the whole family. Bruce Lee's family lost their first male son, which attributed to this theory that there could possibly be a curse on the entire family. It was said in the movie Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, that a demon was after this family. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, under mysterious circumstances, and also while filming a movie. Bruce Lee was in the middle of filming the movie Game of Death when he was found dead at the apartment of a young actress. He took a painkiller, he went and took a nap, and he never woke up. There were many theories, including heat stroke, because he had his sweat glands removed so that he wouldn't sweat on screen. There was another theory that said he had been given the death blow, which is a specific strike in martial arts that doesn't affect you right away. It affects you days later. The absolute eeriest coincidence is the fact that Bruce Lee was filming a movie, Game of Death, that he never got to finish. And in this movie, although Bruce Lee didn't die this way, but in this movie, Game of Death, his character is shot on the set. There's a scene filming a movie inside of a movie, and his character gets shot in the same manner that Brandon Lee was shot years, decades later in The Crow. These coincidences are scary. They're crazy. They're eerie. Of course, everyone's going to be talking about the parallels between these two deaths. But let's talk about the actual death. How did a bullet hit Brandon Lee when all of the bullets on set should have been dummy bullets? Everyone knows you're not going to use real bullets in Hollywood. You're going to use a dummy bullet. But they weren't in Hollywood. They were in North Carolina filming. They also sent the prop master home that day. So there was actually nobody on set the day that Brandon was shot that was in charge of the weapons. This prop gun was supposed to be loaded with blank ammunition, but someone had accidentally left a real bullet tip in the barrel. Now, I am completely unfamiliar with guns and the way that this works, so it was very difficult for me to understand the concept of why this bullet was in there to begin with. So I was listening to this spectacular podcast, which I'm going to shout out right now, and I need you all to go listen to it. This podcast gives a ton of info on the actual movie, everything that happened on set, the actors, the directors, everyone. It's amazing. It's called What Went Wrong, and on this episode of What Went Wrong, host Lizzie Bassett talks to Larry Zanoff, who is a Hollywood armor. That is someone who is in charge of all firearms and weapons on a Hollywood set. Her interview is amazing. I suggest you go listen to it. I'm not going to go through the whole interview here. I'm just going to let you know that Larry Zanoff explained it in the simplest terms for me to understand what happened and for me to explain it to someone like myself who is very unfamiliar with handguns. So what happened that day? Now we have to remember this was not a planned scene. Nobody thought that a gun was going to be used. But as they're filming, they realize we're going to need to insert a shot of Michael Massey's hand holding the gun, pointing it at Brandon Lee. And when the audience sees that shot of the gun, we're going to have to see a real bullet inside of that gun because, you know, our suspension of disbelief is going to be erased if we look down the barrel of an empty gun. So the filmmakers tell some set workers to go down and buy some bullets from a local gun shop. So what they're going to do is they're going to make their own dummy bullets. So to do that, you take live ammo, you take the bullet off the cartridge, you pull it off, and then you pop all the primer caps. And then you put that bullet back into the cartridge case. Since the primer was not removed from the dummy bullet, when this gun was shot with dummy rounds and live rounds, the bullet with the primer still attached lodged a real bullet out of the gun, and that is what hit Brandon Lee. Brandon Lee's fiance, Eliza Hutton, and Brandon's mother, Linda Lee, would tell the filmmakers that they had their blessing to continue with The Crow. They would tell filmmakers that Brandon would have wanted them to continue. He would have wanted to see this project finish because his heart and soul was put into this project, and they said, you have to keep making it. You have to finish. So the family gives their blessing to keep filming, but Paramount said no. Cast and crew were devastated about what happened to Brandon, and they couldn't bring themselves to finish this movie without him. But Miramax stepped in and told Paramount that they would pay an extra $8 million to finish this movie. So Miramax takes over the filming. But this wasn't going to be easy. They were going to have a complete script rewrite. They were going to have to even erase whole characters. And one of those characters was actually played by actor Michael Berryman. Michael Berryman was going to be playing a character called Skull Cowboy. And since the studio was saying that there wasn't going to be able to be any more dialogue filmed scenes, his character was going to have to be cut out now. You might recognize Michael Berryman from movies like The Hills Have Eyes, Lords of Salem, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They were also going to now have to make a mask of Brandon Lee's face. And this was going to freak out a lot of the cast and the crew. Brandon's stunt double, Chad Stahelski, was going to have to fill in for Brandon now, and so they were going to use this mask on his face so he could film the rest of the scenes. Chad Stahelski would actually go on to become the director of the John Wick movies. To finish this film, they were going to have to utilize CGI, and this would be the first time in film history that CGI was used to replace a deceased actor. The Crow was going to be set to be released May 13th, 1994, and rumors were spreading that the shooting of Brandon Lee was going to actually be included in the final cut of the film. This is completely false, but the public was very adamant that when you go see The Crow, you're going to see Brandon Lee's actual death scene. Since this was something that was being talked about a lot in the public, the footage of Brandon Lee being shot was actually destroyed. Once the police concluded their investigation into what actually happened that day on set, they never showed anyone that film footage and they destroyed it. The footage was never leaked. On its opening day, The Crow would make $12 million and grab the #1 spot. But the movie really took off when it came out on home video. I saw it opening day in the movie theater, and gorgeous. It is a gorgeously shot film. And that might be why that film went on to inspire films such as The Dark Knight and The Matrix. Actor Michael Massey, the one who pulled the trigger on the gun that day on set, never fully recovered from this incident. He took a year off of acting, and in a 2005 interview, he admitted that he still has nightmares about that incident, and he didn't believe that he would ever get over it. Michael Massey passed away on October 20th, 2016 at the age of 63. I want to leave you with some words from actor Michael Berryman. He says, "The Crow is not cursed. The Crow is created out of love and loss. In my opinion, Brandon died because a studio cut corners. This makes you appreciate every day. And then you should appreciate every hour. I'm at my most calm when I can appreciate every breath. Life is very precious." Thank you so much for listening to Residue. I appreciate you all so very much, and if you wanted to help me out a little bit, just share the episodes, share my Instagram, my Facebook posts, and it would be awesome if you could leave a review Reviews really help the show out, but they also really help me out because I like to know what you guys think. You can follow me on Instagram at Residue Podcast, Facebook at Residue, a true crime podcast, TikTok, Residue Podcast. I also have a website, residuepodcast.com, and get a hold of me. Let me know what you guys think of the remake of The Crow. If you go see it this weekend, shoot me a little message and let me know how it was. Until next time, stay safe and stay paranoid. And only this one time, because it's this episode, I'm going to say it. Just remember, it can't rain all the time.